Hey, what's up, bookworms? We are back for another talk about nothing. And my guest this week is Mr. Michael K. Vaughan, or as I like to call him, MKV. Sir, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you.
Yeah. Well, how are things out on the coast? Is it nice and warm today, or?
Very. It's been very, very, very hot. It's just start cooling down,
Yeah.
which is good.
No, we don't have that in Texas. It doesn't cool down. It's hotter, or it's just, hell and brimfire and all that good stuff. Well, I am so excited to finally have you on here because it feels like it's hard to find anyone to talk to about anything that came out before the year like 1970.
Right.
And if people that haven't found your channel don't know, is you focus mostly on classic literature, pulp fantasy, things like that, correct?
Oh, correct. Yeah. Fantasy, horror, science fiction, all that stuff, but it's mostly older stuff. That's true.
So when I first found your channel, is because I was trying to find someone else that talked about Robert E. Howard. I talked about Robert E. Howard a couple times. Lukewarm interest. A lot more people I feel like are almost more interested in Conan than they are actually reading Conan.
Mm-hmm.
They like the idea of Conan and Robert E. Howard, stuff like that. So that was just unusual for me because like, for example, when I was started talking about Edgar Rice Burroughs, it's like me and you, I think, are like the only ones who have reviewed Barsoom, so it was really unusual to find someone who was actually going to touch on some of those things. So what made you kind of want to focus on the classics? Just what you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I grew up with. I grew up reading that stuff. Robert E. Howard is my favorite author and has been since I was a kid. Edgar Rice Burroughs I read when I was very young. And I loved those authors when I was younger. And Robert E. Howard especially, you had to hunt for his books at the time I was looking for them, which was in the 80s. And there was a big Howard boom in the 70s. So in the 80s, you had to hunt for his stuff. And that was always fun. And I was just fascinated by Robert E. Howard as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And and some of the first stuff I ever read were things like H.G. Wells, and the very first novel I ever read, and I read it as a little kid, was Dracula.
Right.
Yeah, which is still one of my favorite books of all.
The first horror book I ever read was Dracula.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So we're having that microphone problem again. Sorry, this is live, guys. You got to deal with these things. This is live. So I mean, hopefully it'll fix itself. If not, we'll see if I don't know if I can carry the conversation for a minute while he disconnects and comes back. But we'll see if it fixes itself first. You mentioned Jules Verne. Now I'm kind of curious, kind of situation here when you talk about these kind of things. Why does it seem like Edgar Rice Burroughs gets no love as one of the people who like jump started sci-fi? It seems like it goes Mary Shelley, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, then it like skips to like Asimov and Clarke and Frank Herbert. Why does no one ever talk about Edgar Rice Burroughs? Because John Carter was humongous in its prime.
Yeah, Edgar Rice Burroughs was one of the most popular writers ever. How am I sounding at the moment?
About the same. I don't know. It's weird. We had this before we started, guys, and it was doing it, and he disconnected and came back and was fine. Then, of course, as soon as I pressed live, it started doing it again. But hey, this is live. It happens sometimes.
Okay. Should I keep going or should I?
You want to drop out and come right back?
I'll give it a shot. Hold on.
All right. So, guys, how are you this evening? This is live, guys. Things just go crazy sometimes. But look, I'm excited to have this guy on. If you haven't found his channel yet, I do have it linked in the description below. And I think he's just super, super underrated because there is no one out there on BookTube really that just kind of focuses on classic literature, pulp fantasy, things like that. I think he's one of the best at it. He's got a really, really popular video. It's got like 200,000 views of the top 20 novels of all time. And I don't think a single one of them came out past like 1960. So I think that's a really awesome thing. But yeah, I really do dig his channel. So I hope you guys will check it out. Now, how you sounding?
I don't know. How am I sounding?
I think that sounds much, much better. Awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent.
So some people are already making some comments about your dapper clothes here. So why are you raising the bar for all of us booktubers? I mean, I just want to wear my t-shirts and stuff.
Is this raising the bar?
This is raising the bar for sure. I feel like I really underdressed for this.
Well, when I was first starting this, I never really knew how to dress, and this seemed an easy solution. shirt, tie, vest, hat.
Hmm.
Easy. So
Well,
every time I film, this is what I wear. It just makes it easy.
well, no, sometimes you wear the cowboy stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's only for
You're
June
right.
on the Range, the event, the reading event for June.
So when you first decided to do this, well, basically, I guess I like to ask like an origin question of everyone.
Mhm.
What made you decide one day, you know what? I love these books. I'm going to get on camera and talk about them, see if anybody is interested in listening.
Well, I discovered BookTube and people talking about books on YouTube early in the pandemic. And because of the things I like to read, and I'm obsessed with books and always have been, it seemed like kind of a cool way to connect with other people who were also interested in books. And I like the community aspect of it. And I felt like I was pretty successful with that very early on with my channel, in that I got to connect with a bunch of other people who are also interested in books and reading and talking about the books that they were reading. And even though a lot of people don't read the same kind of things that I read, still I was able to make a lot of connections with a community. And so that's kind of what got me to do it. But yeah, there were a lot of booktubers that I watched before I started doing this. You were one of them.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, you got me to read Malazan.
Oh.
Although
How'd that go for you?
I couldn't keep up with the War Band because
Yeah.
I was reading too much.
Neither could I. They just finished, and I'm still stuck on book 8. So, yeah. Now, this is a good point. Maybe John Carter got kind of overshadowed by Tarzan, at least as far as like modern audiences go, because I feel like they remake. It's like we got the one John Carter movie, which I think was really good, and I wish we'd have got more of it, but Disney completely dropped the ball. But I feel like we get like a new Tarzan movie like every 3 years.
Well, it's interesting with Edgar Rice Burroughs because he was one of the most popular writers ever for a while, but he was a very pulpy writer. And so I think that kind of stigmatized him a little bit. And so he wasn't considered serious, especially because he also wrote Tarzan. And most people's idea of Tarzan comes from the films.
Yeah.
Which, if you ever seen those old black and white Tarzan movies, that's kind of an explanation.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And so he wasn't considered serious. He was considered really pulpy, comic booky type of stuff. So it's easy to overlook him. And there was a big Edgar Rice Burroughs boom in the 60s and into the 70s. But after that, he kind of went away, and other things took his place. And because he was so pulpy, he's just a guy that's easy to overlook, even though his influence was tremendous. And you see it all the time in everything. I mean, every time you watch
Star Wars, they all took stuff from John Carter.
You watch Star Wars. I mean, a lot of that is directly from Edgar Rice Burroughs.
What I found fascinating about going back and reading Edgar Rice Burroughs now is like, usually, like, say I go back and read Howard or I read Lovecraft, I feel like, okay, yeah, this feels like it was written a long time ago. I don't get that feeling with Burroughs. I feel like, okay, this could have been written in like the 70s. I feel like that guy was super ahead of his time in the way that he wrote, and the fact that when he was writing John Carter, we're like, what, 9-10 years removed from like First Flight, and he's writing about spaceships and just air planets and shit. The guy was crazy ahead of his time.
Yeah, and that's why the technology is so interesting in his Barsoom novels, where you'd have people running around with swords, but they also had rifles, single shot rifles, and airships, and the levels of technology were kind of all over the place, because at the time that he was writing, technology was kind of like that. We would have advances in one area, and in another area, things were really very primitive. And so his writing reflected that. And he was able to try to think what an alien culture would be like on this dying planet that's very barbaric. And its level of culture has decreased over time and become more barbaric as the population has decreased. And it's very interesting. Barsoom is a very well realized world, and he was one of the first people that really did that kind of world building.
Yeah.
It's interesting in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, no, I love it. Now I haven't actually read any Tarzan, but I have the first collection, and I want to get into that. But I've heard it is much more savage, I guess you is a word I would use than I mean, on par with like a Conan, where than you would expect from like the movies.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of violence in Tarzan. That's for sure.
Yay! I love it.
You can,
Yes, I'm looking forward to
and
doing
it's
it.
actually the first Tarzan novel is just actually a really well told story. It's an excellent story. Uh, all of those early Tarzan books, there are things about them that are problematic now because they were written so
Yeah, sure,
long ago.
sure.
And that's one of the things to keep in mind. And I also think that's one of the reasons that Burroughs has fallen out of favor, is because there is that stuff in
Yeah.
those novels.
Yeah, I find it hard to talk about anything that's more than 50 years old without having a couple things make you be like, wow. You know?
That was the world, man, and
Yeah.
that was the worldview. A lot
That's
of
why I
these,
try to tell people with Lovecraft is like you got to understand that wasn't unusual in 1920. You know, it wasn't.
particularly in Providence, it was
Yeah.
not unusual.
Yeah.
And,
So here's the first question for you. Do you
Mhm.
own any tweed?
do I own any what?
Tweed. I think they're talking about your awesome clothing. Philip Chase is very famous for his tweed jackets.
No, I don't have much tweed. That's true. I really got to catch up with Philip, but I don't have enough tweed in my life. That's true. I'll work on that.
So let's go back to Conan for a second. So if you had to pick like some favorite Conan stories, I mean, I always automatically probably go to what many hardcore Conan readers are considered like the greatest hits. Like, I mean, I love Rogues in the House and Tower of the Elephant for sure. Queen of the Black Coast, Frost Giant's Daughter, Red Nails. I mean, there's all the ones that come to mind right away. Do you have any like hidden gems that you really don't want to bring up? I mean, look, I came up reading Savage Sword of Conan, the comics, which actually were based off of these, but weren't written by obviously Mr. Howard. But that was kind of like my gateway into this world. And then when I actually read, I was like, oh, okay, this is like so much different, so much better and stuff. So I'm sure someone like you has a lot more than just like the greatest hits of Conan, right?
Well, there's not many Conan stories for there to be hidden gems, but
yeah, right.
The story I like the most is his only novel, which was Hour of the Dragon. And I'm not sure I would say it's his best, but it just has so much cool stuff in it. It is kind of a Conan's greatest hits in one story, because he was kind of doing that deliberately, because he was writing this for an English publisher who basically said to him, hey, we're not interested in short stories, but hey, you come up with a novel, we'll publish it, maybe. And so that's what he did. And that's one of the reasons Hour of the Dragon kind of seems like the Scarlet Citadel and some other stuff, because he kind of used some of those ideas, because he figured nobody's ever going to see this in Weird Tales. I'm going to sell this to this English market and have my first hardcover book over there.
Mm.
And so he put all of this stuff in this one novel, in this one kind of epic Conan novel, where he was a king, as he was in the earlier stories that he wrote. But he loses his kingdom and has to try to get it back. And it's just so much cool stuff in that story. All in one story, all this cool Conan stuff. And if you've never read Conan before and you want to feel for what the series is like, it's an excellent story. It's an excellent story to read.
Oh, I think we lost him. Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Am I okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good.
Well, with Conan, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that you really can read it in any order. I think we've gotten this mode as modern fantasy readers of I've got to read it in order. I mean, I've kind of had that. I did do a lot of research on like Reddit threads and stuff like that. People that tried to put it in like some kind of chronological order, but it really don't matter. I mean, one, you can read a story and like he's a slave, and the next one he's a king, and then he's back to just like, a warrior. It's just I think that because they really are just standalone fun things. It doesn't really matter. I always kind of looked at them as just like an anthology with Conan stuff.
Yeah, he's kind of like Sherlock Holmes in that way, in that the Sherlock Holmes stories were not written in order. His stories bounce around in his lifetime. And Conan is kind of that same way, where he started off in the first couple stories, he was a king. And then Robert E. Howard jumped to when he was a teenager, when he first entered civilization in the Tower of the Elephant. And so, yeah, you can read them in any order. Once you've read them all, though, you get a pretty good sense of his career. And it's interesting. He's an interesting character because he's really smart. He's really clever. He becomes a professional warrior. And so he's kind of like a military contractor in a way, in that he's a professional at what he does. He's really, really good. And you can see in some of those stories his tactical thinking and how he thinks about fighting and armies and all of that stuff. He is very, very good at what he does. And because he thinks like that, and he has a single-minded determination to do what he wants to do basically out of self-interest. And you see this guy, once you've read it all, you see that he started at nothing, the lowest of the low. He was basically a thief in the streets. And he ends up, through pure determination and skill, to become the greatest king of his world, which is pretty impressive. And when all is said and done, it's a pretty ambitious series of stories, if you think of it that way.
Yeah, I think the big misconception is that he's an oaf. And I think that is just because we're going off the movies here, that he's not super intelligent as well. You know?
Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't help, I don't think. I like that movie. But
yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, that's one of the movies that got me into fantasy was because of that movie. You know?
It's a good movie, but the character in that movie is not Conan, not Robert E. Howard's Conan. They're very different.
So this viewer would like to know, since we both like Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, would you ever consider doing Clark Ashton Smith? That's an author I am not familiar with, but I'm sure you might be.
Yeah, I've only done a very little on Clark Ashton Smith. I think I've talked about his Penguin Classics volume, and that might be the only time I've really talked about Clark Ashton Smith. But I do definitely plan on talking a lot more about Clark Ashton Smith because he was a really, really good writer. He was the other great writer from Weird Tales, but he is the one that gets the least amount of attention. And he's a really interesting fantasy writer. I mean, he was really out there, you know, and he had a tremendous imagination and his way with language was, he had such a skill with language because he was primarily a poet. He was a poet first before he was anything else. And he brought that to his stories, that kind of description, that poetical description, which worked brilliantly for his fantasy stories. So yeah, definitely going to be talking about Clark Ashton Smith in the future. I've been concentrating a lot on Robert E. Howard, but that won't last forever. And eventually I will.
You run out of stuff. Yeah.
I will talk more about Clark Ashton Smith. I am planning on talking more about Edgar Rice Burroughs. And some other writers like H. Rider Haggard, which nobody talks about. So, yeah, we'll be talking about a lot of that stuff.
This person would like to know about Elric. Do you plan on doing any Michael Moorcock on your channel?
Definitely. This is a good time for that because not only are they reprinting all of the classic Elric stories in hardcover, finally hardcovers that we can all get easily.
I got the first two.
Yeah. Not only that, but after we get the third volume, we're also getting a new Elric novel following hard upon that. So it's a good time to be an Elric fan. And so I will be talking about Elric in the near future as well. And I really look forward to rereading that stuff because I love Elric. He's such a great character. Kind of the anti-Conan in a way.
I think so. So, hey, let's talk about your channel growth here for a second. When I found your channel, I don't know if time's just flying by faster, but I feel like when I looked you up, you had 1,000 subs, and now you're almost at 8. Did this happen recently? Did you double in size recently, or is just I not been?
I had a couple spurts. You know, it's YouTube is weird in that how that works. I mean, you can just be obscure for a long time, which I was, and then all of a sudden, one of your videos will get picked up by the algorithm, and people see it, and that's all it takes. All it takes is for people to see you.
Yeah, you got that. Your top 20 books is at 200,000 views, isn't it?
And the thing is, that's a terrible video.
My Kindle one, the first one to blow up 100,000 views. Awful video, awful. But I'm thankful because it brought a lot of new people to the channel.
Yeah, I kind of felt that same way with the top 20 books, which was just a joke. I mean, the whole idea of it is ridiculous. And I tried to show that in the video that it's ridiculous, but I'm doing it anyway because why not? Nobody's going to see this thing. And so Yeah, it was a surprise that that was picked up. And people took it serious, which is even worse.
Oh, the comments in top 10 videos are
Oh,
always.
yeah, the worst.
My favorite one is, I can't believe you left this off. I'm like, well, I haven't read it. How am I going to put it on my top video?
Exactly. Yeah. My favorite is when they refer to me as this guy. What does this guy know? Why does that? I mean, you know, I read these, right?
Jake, what's up, my man? In 2020, I decided to get into reading books for my entertainment because I'm just not getting escapism from modern day Hollywood anymore. Mike, your channel's been a great guide for me. Well, thanks very much. That's something I try to do, is tell people watch less movies and read more books, even though you are the movie geek. But you know what, Jake? It's never a problem to become Jake the book geek. You have my endorsement. Absolutely. Thank you, sir. I do appreciate you. Yeah, the videos that, for me, that really just take over, that I never really expect. Okay, like I've got the most viewed video on my channel is about to cross 300,000, and it is That's my crazy. Top 10 horror books of all time. And it's so wild because that was a last minute thing for me to do. I'd never planned to do that. I had time in my Fright Fest, as I call it, when I do nothing but horror books in October, and I threw it together. Had never expected that to take off because horror stuff does very, very mediocre on my channel. So it's weird. That's my most popular video. Then, of course, my Kindle videos, there's a couple of them over 200,000 views. So people love Kindle videos.
Well, horror is never going to be as popular probably as fantasy.
Nah.
And your viewers are expecting fantasy probably. But the good thing about that video, aside from it was a really good video. And I'm glad you did that whole month. I know it wasn't the best for you.
Yeah, it was iffy
and everything.
But yeah, I want to talk, some classic horror novels that I love. So yeah,
that was a good month. As a viewer, it was great. And
thank you.
I'm glad you did that video too, because there are people that are just focused on horror, and it was a good list. I remember that video, and that's one of those things that somebody who normally wouldn't watch your channel, now they're going to watch your channel because they saw that. And I'm glad you did that. And I like it when you branch out to other stuff, like when you did the Michael Crichton stuff and stuff like that.
I try to I do have this thing where I'm like, I'm tired of the channels that are bigger than me. I notice a lot, and just a little smaller than me, or they're talking about the same like 5 or 6 book series. And I'm like, let's change it up some. So yeah, I also take risk for stuff like that. It probably costs me some in the algorithm. I know that, but this is always a hobby. This isn't a job for me. So I've got no problems, taking those risks and stuff. But it is a bummer when sometimes I feel like, hey, this will be, get a lot of new eyes on this something. And it's like crickets. Nothing happens with it. So it happens sometimes.
But, like that video, it could be crickets for a while. And then boom, suddenly people start watching it.
Yeah, and I got to think that first Kindle video for me, it was like 6 months, and I had like 1,000 views, and then overnight it popped up somewhere. I have no idea how that happened. Yeah.
Well, even I saw that video, so yeah, that was it. I remember that.
So I guess the best question, and it's one that I usually lead with, is what are you reading right now, though? You still doing your Westerns?
I'm still doing my Westerns because we're still doing the Western month.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm doing Westerns all this month, which was, that was one thing. I came up with June on the Range, where I was just going to read Westerns all month long, because that is a genre nobody reads at all. And it used to be huge.
Like
and I grew up kind of reading a lot of that stuff. And I thought I'd be the only one doing it. But there were other people doing it. And it hasn't been super popular, but I've heard a lot of people have started to read Westerns that never would have. So that's kind of cool. And I'm going to be moving on to Lonesome Dove probably tomorrow. That's
what I was about to say, is that I love watching Westerns, but for some reason reading them is just like watching paint dry to me. Maybe I haven't read the right ones, but after I finally watched the miniseries of Lonesome Dove last year, I was like, shit, that was good. I need to read that. So I think, because I just tried reading Blood Meridian and I did not like it all, but I also understand that Cormac McCarthy isn't really for everybody. I'm not going to take that as like a standard of what a Western book is. But I was like, besides like, some of the Westerny Dark Tower books by Stephen King, I was like, I don't think I like reading that genre at all. So I'm hoping that Lonesome Dove will make me, get more into it maybe.
I've never read it, but apparently it's like the best book ever.
Yeah.
according to like everybody that talks to me
Yeah,
about it.
Durfee loves it. Brian Lee Durfee absolutely adores that book.
Well, Durfee and my tastes are pretty much in line
Yeah.
most of the time.
Yeah.
That guy has a great channel.
Oh, he's the best. He's the best. I mean,
Yeah.
I think he's a robot. He's a reading robot. Like I'll think everybody tells me all the time, how do you read so fast? I'm like, I'm no Brian Lee Durfee. I'm like, he's putting up reviews of or videos of books the day that he gets them. I can't do that. So yeah.
And he's busy too. It's not like he doesn't have a day job, and he writes these gigantic novels. So yeah, it's a mystery. I think there are 2 or 3 Brian Lee Durfees running around. They're clones. I don't know. But
yeah, he's got some clones. That would make a lot more sense. Okay, so we can't have this talk without me talking about my favorite book of all time. We're gonna get to yours, don't worry. Dune, obviously. Dune is my favorite book of all time. And I kind of was had a little bit of flashbacks of what you said, like you read it when you were younger and you didn't really care for it. It's my 3rd time reading it before all of a sudden, like the 3rd eye opened and it was just like it clicked for me. So you had like a similar experience, yes?
yeah,
when you're younger and then when you were older, you appreciate it more.
When I first read Dune, I read it on a very surface level, and I didn't get any of the deeper stuff that was going on because I was very young when I read it.
We wanted Star Wars, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was very young when I read it, and I didn't get that a lot of the tropes that he was using, he was actually subverting a lot of the tropes that he was using, like the chosen one trope. He was a manufactured chosen one in Dune. And it was a lot deeper. There's so much that I just missed as a young person, as a teenager. And so when I read it, I thought, this is just an adventure science fiction novel. There's nothing special about this book. It was okay. But when I read it as an adult, it kind of blew my mind, because it was just there's so much in that book that you could probably read that a few times and not get everything that's in there. It was an excellent reading experience reading that as an adult, and Dune Messiah was just as good for me.
That was going to ask you. The biggest question I get after, Dune is, are any of the sequels good? I think it's a reputation of like all the sequels are terrible. I think it's like by comparison, I don't think it ever reaches those heights again. But I think up through God Emperor, I think it's amazing. Now I say stop right there, after God Emperor. But I also say with Messiah is if you treat Messiah just on its own as like the sequel to Dune, you'll probably be let down. But if you read it in children, like back to back, I think it's awesome. It's an awesome experience. So I'm glad that a lot of people, like especially on my Discord and stuff, are learning. Hey, I might have misjudged these Dune Chronicles that I never read before. So I'm excited to hear that you did like Messiah, because I know a lot of people don't like that. Well, let's just say the way that the first book is set up, that's not the way that things go. So it's
but it was the only way things could go, really.
Exactly.
Because the story that he was trying to tell. And Dune Messiah made that explicit. This is everything that he was sort of hinting at and pointing at in Dune that was easy to overlook. When Dune Messiah rolls around, it's like this was where this was going the whole time. And it's not where a lot of people want it to go, but this is the story he wanted to tell. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that book, and Children of Dune as well. If you read those 3 books, work very well as a trilogy.
Absolutely. And that's what Denny V wants to make. His trilogy is of those 3 books. Yeah.
Which would be excellent. And everything else after that, it's like a different thing, at least from what I remember. It's been a while since I've read those books, and I'm going to be reading those again maybe next year. But
outstanding. Umarasa, I have worked on my book for 13 years, day in and day out. Every day, I'm wondering if you two would consider taking a look at my work on Amazon. The Lottery Winner and the Gun with No Bullets is the title. Thank you very much for the super chat. And I say keep hustling, my friend. I'll definitely look your book up and see what's about. And I encourage everyone watching and listening to please look it up, give it a check it out, and give them a star rating or something. Help them out. I always say I want to help out some self-published or independent authors. Just don't really have time in my schedule, to read any of them right now. But I do encourage people to keep on hustling, because I always say is all those authors that I love, at one point they were trying to get people to read their books. So I definitely do admire the hustle. Yeah,
Definitely.
lots of Lonesome Dove love in here. Yeah. I'll see now.
Okay.
Brent knows my bread and butter. I'm a character guy, so he's trying to get me. Yeah,
You know,
characters.
like I said, everybody loves Lonesome Dove. I can't believe I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I
So
don't think that there's anybody I've ever heard that has read that didn't like it. So there's that.
there's got to be someone out there.
I'll see. Everybody loves Blood Meridian except me, apparently. I don't know.
No, there's a lot of people that don't like that book.
I don't. Here's what I don't get. If I wrote a book without punctuation, people would tell me I'm a moron. But McCarthy does. Oh, he's a genius. So there we go. But I love The Road. I don't know. Cormac McCarthy's. I've only had that experience of The Road and Blood Meridian up to this point.
Yeah, I haven't gotten very far with that author.
So, people tell me all the time, "Oh, Mike, your book collection is so nice." And I'm like, look, quality over quantity here. I got the quantity, you've got the quality, because I look at some of yours and I just say the prestige level on some of these books is just like, I have many leather books in my office smells of mahogany here, because there's some really, really nice ones that you traditionally show up. How long have you been working on this? Is this stuff that you've had, or you just collect over time, or how's this work?
Yeah, well, you got to figure I've been buying books my whole life, and I'm old. I'm old, so I've had.
You're not like me. You're not collecting them later. You've just been collecting these over the years.
Yeah, I've got an entirely too large a collection of books, but as I've gotten older, for the books that I particularly like, I have been seeking out the best editions I can of those books, just because it's nice to have. They're nice to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I have been doing that. That's true, and a lot of them are right back there. Yeah.
Now I see the Sherlock Holmes one all the time, and here's something that I want to talk about. I never really looked at Agatha Christie's Poirot and or Poirot. I always get told I say it wrong. And Sherlock Holmes as like competitors. But when I was younger, like in high school, I read I can't tell you which ones, but I read it was a book that had 2 Sherlock Holmes stories in it. And I figured them out before I got to the end of the book. So I was like, oh, maybe this is like, the Hardy Boys or something, or Scooby-Doo, where it's just easy for me to figure out. And I know that wasn't the case. But it just kind of like, whatever. And then I read Poirot and I loved it. So I've never really went back to Sherlock. Tell me why I should go back to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, Sherlock Holmes didn't just have mysteries. Sherlock Holmes had adventures. And so his mysteries are at a very adventurous level, and it's just fun to read about Sherlock Holmes. The mysteries as puzzles sometimes work and sometimes they don't, but as character studies they always work, and the stories themselves almost always work out really, really well as stories, because they're basically stories about this weird guy who thinks in a weird way and has a really weird job. And his job is to solve crimes both large and small. And they're all different. He wasn't one of these characters who just solved murders. There are actually very few murders in Sherlock Holmes. It was always some weird mystery or some strange problem. Or it was a problem that if you didn't solve it, the government would fall, and they were well written, all this stuff. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, his work, there's so much of his work that nobody ever reads. Pretty much people only read Sherlock Holmes. This guy wrote 60, 70 books. And
I didn't know that. Right.
Yeah, and none of that stuff should have been forgotten or left on the wayside, because he knows how to tell a story, this guy. He's sort of like, in an odd way, Edgar Rice Burroughs in the way he tells stories, where no matter how old these books are, you can connect to them because he writes them in a very clear way, a conversational way. He didn't fancy it up, but he told these stories very directly and very clearly. And so he told them in a way that you can connect with them very, very well. And that doesn't just go with his Sherlock Holmes stories. That goes with a lot of his stories. He wrote a lot of historical novels. He wrote all kinds of stuff. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Definitely a writer who should be read more often. But you never see anything except Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I had no idea. I thought that was... I mean, I figured because it's like people don't know Bram Stoker wrote more things than Dracula. You know, it's just, you buy anything by Bram Stoker, it says Dracula and other stories. So I feel like maybe Doyle's got the same kind of a reputation there.
Well, a lot of writers did, if you think about it. Jules Verne, 60, 70 books this guy wrote. H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells wrote a ton of books that nobody reads. That's the case of a lot of classic authors. Wilkie Collins, for example, you'll see 4, maybe 5 books, maybe 5. He wrote a heck of a lot more than that. But a lot of these are not in print. You can get them all as ebooks, but as print books, a lot of these older authors, you just never see that stuff. And so that's a reason a lot of that stuff's been forgotten, even though a lot of it is really, really good.
This definitely seems like a question for you. Do you have any fine small press like Tartar's Press, Centipede Press, Subterranean Press? I've heard of that one. They're just too expensive for me to buy. You have anything like that in your collection back there?
What do I have? I've got some Nightshade that's pretty good. Talking about authors that are unjustly forgotten, I've got a set of William Hope Hodgson here, who was a major influence on H.P. Lovecraft. He wrote cosmic horror kind of stuff before cosmic horror was a thing. And what else do I have? I do have Centipede Press around here somewhere. It's down below. I got Algernon Blackwood down there. I got a lot of stuff like that, actually. Folio Society, got lots of folio. A lot of good stuff floating around here at the Manor.
Ben, you are too kind. Found your channel a few months back after getting into Stephen King. Your enthusiasm for genre fiction is so infectious. Keep up the great work. That's why I do what I do. I just want more people to read. But you actually are doing a slow Stephen King read, correct? I mean, I think you started at the beginning, and are you all the way to the Gunslinger or Dead Zone?
I just finished the Gunslinger.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm reading them in publication order. And an interesting thing about that is that a lot of these Stephen King books, I read most of them from the 70s and the 80s, but I read them in the 80s, and so I was very young when I read them. So
That's
every
going to be reading when I was reading, so I can imagine. So
yeah. Every single book that I've read from him, I've had a completely different experience from the first time I've read his books. Like with Cujo, for example, which I remember really disliking when I read it the first time. And again, much like Dune, I was just too young to get what that book was about. It was all about adult domestic misery and the things that scare adults, as well as being about a big scary dog. And so when I read it this time, I got it. I understood why there was all this other stuff, all this domestic stuff, because that was what the book was about. And I think with every Stephen King book that I've read, I've had an experience like that where I've seen it through completely different eyes, and it felt like a different book when I've read them. So it's been a good experience. I would have liked to get farther on this, but I'm reading everything else at the same time, which is the problem.
Yeah, I started doing my reread in publication, or I was doing publication order just under his own name. I wasn't doing any of his Richard Bachman stuff, and I keep getting sidetracked, but I do appreciate that. I guess you can call Stephen King classic literature now. I mean, some of his books are over 45 years old now, so I guess you get to the point. I mean, what do you think is that definition of classic literature? Does it have to be like before we were born, but before our lifetimes? I don't even know how some people rate this.
It's a tricky question. What makes classic literature? Up to now, classic literature, one of the requirements really is that it had to be in the public domain so that anybody could publish it.
Right, right.
It had to be in the public domain and a book that people wanted to read. And one good thing about classics is they tend to be good because they have lasted this long. So when you pick up a classic, there's a good chance that it's going to be a good book. But it's a little trickier nowadays. What is classic literature, especially when you have publishers like Penguin Classics who are always changing their minds, and they will have, suddenly they'll just add something to their classic line, which is unusual. And then 5 years later, it's out of print. So is it not a classic
Or
anymore?
it's banned. Like I love looking at some of the stuff that was always on my reading lists in high school, and now it's on the banned books. I'm like, what? What happened? What happened in the last 20 years? I mean, geez, come on. So,
Well, it's like we were talking about earlier with Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Hmm.
There's a lot of stuff in older books that makes people uncomfortable.
sure.
And so a lot of people think, well, we should just avoid that book. Or even worse, well, I feel guilty for taking any entertainment value out of that book because it has this thing in it. But one of the reasons these books are important, especially classic literature, is not just the stories themselves. It's the fact that this stuff is in there. Because a classic work of literature is a time capsule. It encapsulates what people were interested at the time, what the ideas that they had, any prejudices that they had. It's going to be in there. It's going to be captured in that book. And so that's all important stuff. And that's stuff we should know. So the last thing you should do is ban this stuff.
Absolutely.
You should be able to read it and recognize what's not right about it and realize this is how people thought back then. And that's one of the reasons I feel like that stuff's important. You should never ban a book just for that reason.
Yeah, I'm a real big, ignoring history, doomed to repeat it kind of guy. So when I talk about Gone with the Wind, and people are like, "Oh, you shouldn't promote that book," and I'm like, I think that's a great snapshot of America at one of its lowest moments. It is absolutely something that should be preserved and passed forward, in my opinion, because ignoring it doesn't make it kind of go away. But I always like to look at stuff like that and be like, "Hey, look how far we've come." I actually do appreciate these things.
Exactly. When you come across a moment in a book that shocks you because of stuff like that, that's a good thing. It's good that you're shocked. That means we've moved on.
Oh, yeah. Like I hear that Mark Twain makes people uncomfortable. It's supposed to.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're talking about classics here. I got to talk about two I believe that we disagree on.
Okay.
I am not a fan of Moby Dick, which I think just about everyone knows at this point. And I believe Great Gatsby is your favorite book ever.
Well, it's not my favorite book ever, but it's up there. It's in my top 100. I love that book.
Yeah, that was both of those two were on my 5 classics I did not enjoy. So, what is it exactly about Great Gatsby that you enjoyed? Because I just think it was just like Gatsby was just like psychotic. I don't know. I don't know. I just didn't like it.
Gatsby was a little bit more than a psychotic. Gatsby was a loser who couldn't accept that. And so he tried every sneaky way he could to be what he felt like a winner would be, right? He's a loser and shady. He's shady as all hell, Great Gatsby was. And he knew what he wanted to be. And he was in love with this girl who really wasn't much, but he idealized her. He thought she was something. She was kind of a prize for him. And so that life, that identity, the girl, all this stuff he wanted. And so he built up this fake identity to try to get to it. And it was all about that. It was a character study. And there were things that were sad about this guy. There were things that were just kind of pathetic. And yet at the same time, you had to admire him in a way for just going for it and just trying in all the wrong ways to be what he wanted to be. So there's a lot behind that book. But yeah, I can get that. A lot of people don't like that book.
Oh, I get it with all classics. I mean, I love a lot of classics, and I absolutely understand why a lot of people do not like them. I get that a lot. Like, I mean, I still get people all the time that are like, "Oh, I can't take your opinion seriously because you didn't like Moby Dick." I mean, okay, that's fine. I don't know. You said in your review that with Moby Dick, this book shouldn't work. Well, it didn't work for me. Why did it work for you?
Because everything came together. It seems like it shouldn't. Because basically buried underneath all of this whaling stuff and stuff about the color white and all this other weird stuff that's in there is a basic adventure story, which is short, right? It's a short adventure story. They go out looking for Moby Dick, and then, you know what happens at the end. So, but the way he switches chapters to different kinds of things about whaling and about the world and about the experiences that they're experiencing on this book adds a layer of reality to the story. Because suddenly you're learning about what they're doing, the life they're living, the thoughts that they have, and it's all mixed up with the story. And that helps bring a level of reality and sophistication to the story that it would not have. So as an adventure story, let's go chase the whale, you know, and I really want to get this whale if I may have, because I'm obsessed. You have that level to it. And it works as an adventure story. It would only work as a short one, though. But it's a lot more than that, because he's packing all of this other philosophical stuff in there. And I get why that doesn't work, you know, for people, because they're just like, this is not what I came for.
I think that's one of those, maybe if I read it now as opposed, you know, reading it 16 when it was an assignment, which that never really bothered me. I mean, a lot of those classes I talked about were stuff that was assigned to me in high school, and I loved them. So I don't know. Maybe it's just, I think that's what's just damaged my enjoyment of all nautical books. That's why I love Westerns, and I love movies that take place on the ocean, but reading about them it just bores the hell out of me. I don't know why. I like Treasure Island. That's about it.
Treasure Island was really good.
Yeah,
that was really good. But that's, you know, that's an interesting thing that you'll find with other content creators who do what we do, who talk about books. You always find people that disagree strongly about certain books, and yet you can trust their opinions about a lot of other stuff, which makes it interesting, because readers are interesting and we all have different perspectives. And so your perspective on Moby Dick is just as valuable as mine. And it's interesting that you have a different perspective, because you're coming from a different place and you have different, you like different things. And that's one of the things I like about this community, is that there are people with all of these different opinions. And you can have a book and you have 10 different reviews on this book, and they can all be different. You know, it's interesting.
Especially on the classics. All right, it's going to be some time to talk about some horror here. So have you read Thomas Tessier, Michael McDowell, Michael Talbot, or James Herbert? I get recommended James Herbert a ton in my Stephen King videos, but I haven't read any of these.
I've read Michael McDowell and James Herbert. Michael Talbot I have, but it's been a long time. James Herbert I can strongly recommend. He's just savage, that guy. And yeah, that's a guy who'll go for the throat. But again, there's a bit more in his stories than that. Although they are, on the face of them, pretty trashy stories about, you know, fog that drives people insane and killer rats. But they're very entertaining, and they usually have something a little bit more in them than that. I had a good time last year reading The Fog. I think my review for The Fog was like a half hour, which is unheard of for me. But
is that what the John Carpenter movie was based on?
No, that was entirely different. Completely different story.
Let's say, well, that's a rad movie. So
it was.
Yeah,
it was just a different thing.
Yeah. So Lovecraft, obviously, when you talk about horror, you got to talk about the tentacles here. This is another one of those I did recently. I think both of us did actually a top 10 Lovecraft stories kind of thing. And that was a very hard video for me to make, because I think when I just started put pen to paper and started jotting them down, I had like over 20 that I really loved. I mean, Color Out of Space is probably always going to be my favorite, just because how many times has that been used? Out the Mountains of Madness, of course. I think it's just a classic. And I think if you want like something that feels like a novel by Lovecraft, that's definitely the way to go. Because, like, you know, most Weird Tales writers at that time, I mean, these were magazine in length usually. You know, they were shorter, 15 pages or whatever. Cthulhu, Dagon, Rats in the Walls, Lurking Fear. I mean, these are some of my favorites. What are some of your favorite Lovecraft stories?
A lot of my favorites are the popular favorites.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
Because that was his best stuff, his Cthulhu mythos and that stuff. Of his earlier stuff, Rats in the Walls was a standout.
Yeah,
and The Outsider was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there's a lot of his shorter stories which are really, really good. Cool Air is a story I like a lot, and it's just such a smart, short, little horror story. But as far as what I think is his best work, yeah, it's going to be Call of Cthulhu, Haunter of the Dark. I think is better than people give it credit for. Whisperer in the Darkness is one of my favorites. It has its faults, but I love the feeling of that story. I love the feeling of the aliens attacking this guy alone out in his cabin, and was that, how much of that was true and how much of it wasn't. I mean, there's just so much about that story which is so good. The Thing on the Doorstep, a story with the least scary title ever, is actually a really, really good story. And I think that is another underrated Lovecraft story, because here in The Thing on the Doorstep, you have a real human relationship in that story, where you have two best friends, and that's what the story is about. But basically, that story is, what would you do for your best friend? How far would you go to help this best friend of yours when they're in trouble, unlike any trouble you've ever seen before? And it's a dark story. It has a female character, surprisingly enough, unlike a lot of Lovecraft stories does. It ties into Shadow over Innsmouth, which is one of his best stories.
Oh yeah. You talk about paranoia. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's just excellent. And a lot of his stories are there are a lot of underrated H.P. Lovecraft stories, and I think that's probably one of them. But there are a lot of them that we can all agree on. Color Out of Space was magnificent.
Yeah,
that is just a terrifying story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it perfectly encapsulates cosmic horror. This thing, we don't know what it is or where it is or what it wants.
And it's turning your loved ones into big greasy monsters. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing that you did.
Yeah.
And that's what's important about his work. Unlike a lot of the work that came before him, is there's nothing that these people did. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's no morality as far as what happens to characters in Lovecraft.
Yeah, and I love that he never feels the need to give you a happy ending. In fact, when he gives you a happy ending, it's like, wow, what's going on? He must have been drinking that day.
Yeah, Shadow over Innsmouth, that was his version of a happy ending.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, some great stuff here. Now, Prey, I gotta say, that is a criminal take. I love The Count of Monte Cristo. I know it's like one of the longest books ever, but oh my God, is it so good. I've never read a book with more twists and turns and just complete, like, oh my God moments than The Count of Monte Cristo, the quintessential tale of revenge. I know that you are a fan as well, correct?
Huge fan of that book. Magnificent book. Yeah, I love it.
Some other ones, I mean, like, I already talked about Gone with the Wind. I love Tomahawk, Lord of the Flies, To Kill a Mockingbird. I believe we both have the same opinion on that. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird. Fahrenheit 451. I know everybody always goes 1984, and I do like 1984, but I was like, for whatever reason, I always compared that and Fahrenheit 451, maybe because I read them both at kind of the same time. But, you know, it's one of those things that that people have been trying to use those two books to, like, further their, like, you know, narrative on what the world's going to right now. But you know what? Every year it kind of seems like, you know, it kind of feels more and more realistic. And Heart of Darkness is another one I believe that you brought up that me and my wife just disagree on this. She cannot stand that story. I love it. I always make her watch Apocalypse Now, and she hates that for that reason, I think, because one of her professors made her study Heart of Darkness in college. And I love it. Talk about it, just a journey into madness right there. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and that movie actually did a really good job capturing the spirit of that book.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies, and that's a great book there. But I guess the biggest one I got when I went through your list is I think you need to tell me why I need to get a little Russian here. Read some Tolstoy, read some Dostoevsky. Is that Dostoevsky? You kept saying it. Wait, how do you say it?
Dostoevsky.
Yeah, see, I was like Dostoevsky, so I was like, I'm saying it wrong. He's probably saying it right. So, Crime and Punishment and War and Peace, obviously, are the ones that come to mind. But I know there's a lot more from these gentlemen, right?
War and Peace is the one everybody's afraid of because it's gigantic, and it has a million characters in it, which kind of makes me laugh because these are the same people that are reading like Brandon Sanderson
or Malazan.
Yeah. Listen, if you've read Malazan and you understand everything in it, you could read anything. You could literally read anything. You know, that is not an easy book as far as characters and what's going on. And it's not, I mean, if you can read that and get it, you will have no problem with War and Peace. It'll be easy, you know, but it's just such a brilliant book. It's earned its reputation. I mean, it has a great reputation for a reason. It's a magnificent book because Tolstoy is able to take this story and he can have this huge scope And yet, when he's describing and talking about things, it's like he can zoom in on the tiniest details, and so you have such a scope in these characters in this story, and these characters are just great characters, and there are a lot of them, but it's focusing on like a few families and a few individuals, and so it's nothing that you can't deal with, and it's a tremendously worthwhile read and a tremendously entertaining read as well, right up until you get to the end when it has all the philosophy at the back.
I feel like War and Peace and Shogun, like Lavelle, those are like the two that I've always just been like, because of the size. I admit it.
I read Shogun for the first time this year, and it's the best book I've read this year.
I don't think it's another one of those that I don't feel like anyone's ever said they disliked it.
And it's one of those things where it's huge, but it just rockets right along, and I would not cut out a page of that book.
Well, I say that, and then I read this Robert McCammon book that was 900 pages this week, and amazing, by the way. This is just so good. Oh my God, this book was good.
I keep kicking that down the road, and I know I shouldn't, because
everyone always told me as a big Stephen King fan that I would like Robert McCammon, and I was like, how often I hear that? Do you like this author? And I'm like, I don't feel anything like Stephen King. This is the first author where I do see a lot of King similarities. I've read this and Boy's Life now back-to-back months. They're both really, really good.
I hear Boy's Life is his best work, probably.
I don't know. I'd flip a coin between these two. I mean, this is very much like his version of The Stand, which is in Boy's Life. That's what I hear. Yeah. Boy's Life, it would be very much like The Body, or maybe It without the big scary clown. Just the coming of age kind of story. But yeah, right. I think so. As far as Clive Barker, I would like to talk about Clive Barker some more. I plan to read a lot more of him, and yet all I've read is Weave World. I don't know. Which
is not the thing you would read, right?
Yeah.
Weave World, it's his kind of fantasy thing with horror elements. When everybody would probably recommend you read Books of Blood first.
Yeah.
Or Damnation Game or something like that.
I have Damnation Game. I have a Magica and the Books of Blood, and I think the Books of Blood would probably be where, because I did get interested in him because of horror. Stephen King's the one who recommended him. They've seen The Face of Horror, The New Future of Horror, and it's Clive Barker. And then everyone that they recommend, the books they recommend to me were like his fantasy ones. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna stick to Books of Blood. But yeah, that's my fault that I haven't actually read more of him.
Got plenty of time.
Yeah. House on Haunted Hill is my second or third horror novel. Yeah, Shirley Jackson. Yeah, that's a great book, man. Or was that Haunting a Hill House?
Haunting a Hill House. Yeah.
I always do that. No, I'm not sure I know House on Haunted Hill. Who does that one?
Don't know. I know Haunting of Hill House. I know Hill House. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read that twice. I read it in high school, and I read that right before the Netflix series came out again. So yeah, that's great stuff. And Hellbound Heart, of course, I've read that one. I mean, yeah, of course. I think I read that at the same time as everybody else did when the movie first blew up. And I mean, when I was like at the age where Freddy and Jason were still the shit, and then I saw Pinhead, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what that is. I got to read it. And, that's when you can really read with a couple of so short.
The Cenobites took it to another level.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's great stuff. So I want to talk about some classic comics here, because that's another thing that I don't talk too much on the channel about, because minimal interest. Manga seems to be really more popular on BookTube than comics. But man, I grew up, like I said, reading Savage Sword of Conan, classic Green Lantern, Watchmen. I still think is one of the greatest comics ever. And I love that you talk so much about it, because I just love that classic DC stuff of Justice League, all those guys in Justice League. And that's what makes me so mad that Warner Brothers can't get their shit together and make a really, really great movie universe, because they've got the best characters. I know everybody, modern audiences now, they're all about, Iron Man and Captain America. That's great. I love those characters too. But you're talking about Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern here and the Flash. Oh my God, this lineup is just like, it feels like if you've got like a sports team that has like 5 all-stars and the coach is just using them wrong. That's how I feel about those movies. But
I think
back to the comics.
Right.
I love that you cover that old stuff, because it seems like no one talks about the classic comics anymore, because let's be honest, since like New 52 and up, At least that's
Yeah,
how I
I
feel.
would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I talk about comics once a week and nobody watches them. I mean, they
It's
get
like my Stephen King stuff. People are like, yeah, I
exactly
love your channel for your Stephen King stuff. I'm like, well, then why are only like 400 people watching these videos?
exactly. I get a third or less
Yeah.
watching those videos. But you know, that's how it goes.
Mm.
There are going to be videos that you want to make, and it's going to have much fewer people.
Yeah, like
are gonna be
I
interested.
know I'm gonna review the Elvis movie, and I know no one that watches my channel gives a shit, but I've got to talk about it because I'm excited about it. So,
Sure. Well, you know, and that's one of the nice things actually about having a channel is that you can do that.
Yeah.
And I just don't even. It's like I know no one's going to watch the comic book videos. Every once in a while, one will get a lot of views, but it's so rare. But I know going in, nobody's going to watch this.
Just
I'm going to do it anyway.
the top 10 comics of all time. Maybe it'll
Even if I did that, I don't think I would get a ton of interest. But that's okay, you know, because the people that do want to watch it really want to watch it. And I do have people that will watch every Wednesday, whatever I talk about.
I watched your Superman ones, and I love because I feel like Superman again. Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter, major influence for Superman.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another one that people don't really consider. But just, I mean, did you grow up reading these, or how do you really just get interested in this? Just stuff from you go back to, or is this just stuff you've been reading since? Because I've been reading like Spider-Man and Justice League since I was a kid.
Yeah, with comics, I mostly talk about the older stuff because again, it's stuff that I grew up reading. I mean, I can't even remember when I started reading comics. I have no idea what the first comic books I read were because it's so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been reading comics my whole life, and I've got like a wall of graphic novels and omnibuses and things like that.
Have you done a bookshelf tour yet?
I have. I did do a comics
look that up.
bookshelf tour. It's on there somewhere on my page. Yeah. And yeah, and so I love to talk about the older comics. I just talked about. I guess today I put up my Green Lantern, my Silver Age Green Lantern video, and you know I love that old stuff. And yeah, I haven't talked too much about newer comics too much because they depress me for the most part. But yeah, the older stuff, right up through the 80s, even into the 90s, I liked all that stuff. Yeah.
You're right on this one. The New 52 did have some stuff in it. Scott Snyder's Batman was good. Jeff Johns' Green Lantern was amazing, I thought, and Flash. I thought Jeff Johns was able to breathe new life into a lot of those classic characters. Really good, but unfortunately, everything else was kind of weighed down with a lot of stuff. Because I was really excited when New 52 happened. I was like, great, it's time to fix their continuity, start over, and then
it was a disaster.
It was like, here's Earth 57. I'm like, what? Yeah, so yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that none of those comic books mentioned there needed the New 52.
Mm.
You know, they could have just, and they did for the most part. Green Lantern didn't skip a beat; it just kept going. You know, and Batman was great, but you didn't need the New 52 to happen. In fact, it didn't make any sense because in the New 52, everybody was supposed to have started their career 5 years earlier than these comics. And you've got a teenage Robin and a grown-up Nightwing. I mean, it didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And it still confuses me. But the New 52 wasn't necessary for that.
See, Lars, I get this stuff with Green Lantern all the time, and I talk to these younger kids, and they're all about like Kyle Rayner. I mean, no, Hal Jordan is Green Lantern, okay? I'll even accept Guy Gardner and John Stewart, but get out of here with that Kyle Rayner stuff. But I get it is harder for modern audiences to go back where everything looks kind of, were they working with like 6 colors back then? They got like 3,000 colors in their comics and stuff. So I get that's kind of hard, but the stories can't be beat, man.
They can't. And I think there is an interest growing for a lot of that older stuff, particularly the Marvel stuff, because Marvel is a company that does this right. They do they have a sharp reprint program, and they do it really well. DC's the opposite. DC has a terrible reprint program. They do everything wrong, but Marvel's got it going on. And so they know how much to reprint, what to reprint, when to reprint it. Yeah,
a lot of those Spider-Man reprints, I got them digital, and they're so high resolution. You can like zoom in, like all that. A lot of people, I know collectors, obviously, are like, I can't believe you went digital with your comics. It's like, it's just so nice. And plus, I'm such a collector. I'll be the person who's like, oh, I've got like the first 40 issues except this one, and it's just going to drive me crazy. But I ain't got one. And then I'm just going to board them and not let them ever see light. So why would I do that? So yeah, I started collecting those on on digital, or if they got like the hardcover versions and stuff like that. But
I read a lot of digital comics, actually.
yeah,
I read
it's so
Saga.
nice reading it on an iPad, so bright and colorful. And like I said, the resolution's so great. You can zoom in like to each panel. It's so great. Lynn, I used to read the Dick Tracy one that was in the, this is how old I was, guys, in the funny papers that used to come in a newspaper. I would read the Dick Tracy comics. I don't know if that's Chester Gold or not. So I have no idea. Were you ever into Dick Tracy at all?
Dick Tracy, I miss Dick Tracy. No. Saw the movie.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah, I think that that movie's underrated in my opinion. Warren Beatty, that's pretty good. It really did feel like a comic book. It really did.
It had a sense of style to it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's some really good stuff. But yeah, I'm glad that someone out there is talking about some comics, and it isn't just the 12 millionth person talking about One Piece. Talking about some good old classic American comics. That us dinosaurs still really do love.
And like I said, there is an interest because all of this reprint stuff that they put out, it sells out.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't get an omnibus when it comes out, you're going to be paying through the nose for it because all of that stuff sells out because there's an audience for this stuff. And it's not just all old guys like me. Younger people have started developing an interest in this stuff. And that's always gratifying. And it's gratifying with the other stuff I do. Like Robert E. Howard, I feel like there is a growing interest in Robert E. Howard, where maybe a year ago I didn't notice that.
I feel like if they put out just one great adaptation, that Robert E. Howard stuff would just explode with modern audiences. And they were making this series on Amazon, and it sounded like it was going to be really, really great. And they put the kibosh on it at like the last moment. And I was like, then now Netflix has got it. And we know how Netflix is handling the adaptations these days. So, I mean, I'm so hopeful for Sandman, but who knows? But yeah,
my hopes are never high.
No, I always say with all adaptation, I think the last adaptation that I was excited for and I believed in was A Song of Ice and Fire, because I was reading those long before HBO even bought the rights. And following it, I was like, okay, these guys, at the time, I was like, these guys really are into this series. It sounds like it's being handled the right way. That was the last one. Ever since then, I'm like, I used to go from like rooting for these things to get adapted to now being like, please don't make that. Please don't. I think that's the years of being beaten down as a Stephen King fan and Michael Crichton, and seeing the I can't think of two authors that have been adapted more and more poorly than those two authors right there. Everything almost is always terrible. In fact, when there's a great one, it's like it surprises you when there's actually a great one, So yeah, with adaptation, I always hope for the best, expect the worst. That's always the best method, especially as many times I've seen Warner Brothers break my heart with my DC characters. So,
which is weird. It's weird they can't make a good movie about those guys.
Well, I mean, I've always heard that like the people in charge are always like, oh, well, we don't want the comic book people helping us on these. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, they're the ones who've kept these characters alive for 100 years. Maybe they know what they're talking about. But yeah, I think so. That's a great point. I don't know if you saw The Northman. If they made a movie of Conan like similar to The Northman, I think it could be really, really huge.
They could. I mean, it could be done. It just hasn't been done yet.
I was excited when the Momoa movie was coming out, and then I saw like 30 minutes in the theater. I was like, oh no.
that
it wasn't his fault.
That movie was terrible, which is a shame because they got the right guy to play Conan.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't his fault. That was just a horrible, horrible script. But yeah.
Yeah, it was strange that everything about that movie was weird. Like I said, it's too bad because he would have made a good Conan in a good Conan movie. It just, it didn't happen.
DC animated movies are still really good. I'll agree with that. Well, I don't. Since they stopped having Conroy as Batman, I'm still not watching out of protest. The man's still alive. He's not like what Mark Hamill doesn't want to do the Joker anymore. He's retired. Kevin Conroy still wants to do Batman. I don't know why you're asking anybody besides him to do Batman. It's just weird. I mean, I can't read a Batman comic without hearing Kevin Conroy's voice in my head. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's a me thing, but it's exciting that there's someone else really into these old comics. Have you read Watchmen?
Oh yeah, several times.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a comic that's just Alan Lee, weird, or Alan Moore, weird guy. But oh my God, Watchmen, amazing.
I read that issue by issue as it was released.
Really? No, I didn't. I didn't find it until the 90s.
I remember picking up that first issue of Watchmen and not knowing what the hell it was, and it was great. I didn't even. reading to the end of that story, and you knew it was some kind of superhero mystery. That's what it seemed like. And you thought that's all it was going to be. But you wanted to read the next part. I'll tell you that. But I remember reading that and just having no clue where this thing was going or how important it was going to be. And I collected every single issue. And
So
it just
doing
got,
this in real time, how did you react to the squid the first time?
that was horrible.
I actually think that the movie did that better. I actually think
They
did that better in the
You're
movie.
right.
Yeah.
It was weird because why would you make your ending an ending from an Outer Limits episode, which is what it was.
It was out of left field.
It was,
I felt like I have no idea how to end this. Yeah.
It might have been because, and he had to be working up to it, right? But I remember when I read it, I'm like, I saw this on Outer Limits. You know, it had this very same thing that was going to happen in an Outer Limits episode. And he just took it and made it into this ending to this story. And it was weird. And you're right. The film, for all its faults that it might have had, the ending was better.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Actually, it's like in the theater when I saw the movie, I liked it, but then I watched the director's cut and I loved it. So, but I understand that that's a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's how you make a boring superhero movie." I was like, "That's the comic was not. It was a deconstruction before deconstructions were cool of superheroes." So,
right,
I think it actually nailed that quite a bit. What is our take on the Rings of Power controversy? With me, it's the same as it is kind of with Lucasfilm. I feel like anytime a studio is attacking their fan base before anyone's even said anything or seen anything, I don't feel like it's going to go well. I feel like they're trying to distract from something that they know is not going to be great. So, like I said, hope for the best, expect the worst. I'm way more excited about House of the Dragon than I am Rings of Power, especially after Wheel of Time really let me down. So
yeah, Rings of Power, just pretend it doesn't exist. Maybe if someone talks to you and says how great it was, maybe then pay attention. But until then, just like,
oh, I mean,
if
you want this to change, quit watching it. People are like, "Oh, well, I'm going to watch just out of hate." And I'm like, "Well, then they're going to keep making it." You know, that's what I did with Star Wars. I just walked away from it. You know, and maybe eventually they'll get the hint. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Rings of Power. It's going to come and go, and I won't notice.
Yeah, I think so. Because we did like those after shows of Wheel of Time. And I was planning on doing the same thing with Rings of Power. I was like, no, I'll probably say some stuff that'll get me demonetized because the guy, it's like with Wheel of Time, I can let it go. With Lord of the Rings, I've been reading that since I was like 8, you know, so that's sacred to me. So yeah, I can never actually do that.
It kind of is, you know, because it is the most important fantasy novel ever written. I mean, it is. I mean, there are two foundations of modern fantasy. Two major ones, and one is Lord of the Rings. The other one is all of Robert E. Howard's fantasy work. I mean, these are two very different kinds of things, but it's what everything else is built off.
Oh, I say all the time that Robert E. Howard doesn't get enough credit for creating like a shared universe before Tolkien. You know, I mean, you read oh God, what is it? Iberian Age, whatever. The history at the beginning is just like, holy crap, is this deep? So yeah, I think that he doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yeah, and according to Lynn Carter, at least, even Tolkien liked Howard. So
oh yeah,
that was.
I always I love that everybody always brings up that Tolkien didn't like Dune, and I'm like, I read his letter about why he didn't like Dune. I was like, is that like the most gentlemanly way to ever say that something wasn't for you ever? That man was he was a gift. He was a gift. Okay, so you do like some modern stuff here. I think that's something that's kind of gotten lost. You get known as, you know, the classic guy, so that people don't think that you like anything. I mean, I can see over your shoulder there. I just talked about not Lord of the Rings, the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, which is my favorite modern fantasy series.
I agree, 100%.
And it's so good. So, what are some other? I mean, you want to talk about Joe? We can talk about Joe. What do you like about the First Law? I can always talk about First Law.
The First Law is fantastic. It just has. It just as a story, it takes all of this fantasy stuff and completely deconstructs it.
Absolutely.
So that as you're reading it, you have no idea what you're going to get. And not only that, you have no idea that you have no idea what you're going to get as you get further into it. It has great characters. I mean, anytime that the best character in a novel is a torturer, you know, that you're supposed to, that would be the villain in any book. and yet he's the most compelling and one of the most sympathetic characters in the novel. I mean, it's an achievement. And as a story, it's just fantastic. A lot of people gripe when they read the first one because they say it has no plot. But really, it's a 3-part novel. It's one big story. And so you have the introductory story and where all of those characters go. I mean, you read the second volume. I mean, if you get that far, you're not going to stop, right? I mean, you want to find out what happens, and you care about everybody, no matter how, excuse my terrible dog, no matter how dark some of these characters are. I mean, it's terribly fascinating.
I got one too. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Mine waits until I'm on a work call to do it.
Oh, mine waits until I'm doing a video, and then she will cause trouble. But another thing about the First Law trilogy is it's really funny. You know, it has great humor in it. And so it's just, it works on all of these levels. And the characters are complex. You know, Nine Fingers is a complex character, you know? I mean, there's a lot going on in that novel.
Yeah, that is the first book that I had read like that, where I was like, wow, none of these characters are likable at all, but yet I'm rooting for them. It was so weird. Yeah. That's just what's always just, anytime ever someone says, oh, you'll like this, it's similar to First Law, and I'll read it, and it's like, it's either just, I don't know if it's just missing that humor, it's just missing Abercrombie's amazing character work, or what it is. It just never really quite feels the same to me, or it feels like someone's trying to just, you know, rip it off. And I don't know, maybe I've just put it on a pedestal, I mean, because it was the first one that I read of that type. I don't know, but
I don't think so. I think if you put it on a pedestal, it earns that pedestal, because I think it's really, really good. And I think outside of genre fantasy is probably underrated. I think it should be widely read a bit more widely. I think it's lumped into a grim, dark fantasy, and that's what it is, you know? And I think it works on a lot of different levels. I don't think it's just that. No matter, who knows what that even is, but it's not just that. It's a really, really good story. I can go on and on because I love the First Law trilogy.
Have you read the sequel books and everything too?
You know what? I haven't gotten too far because I've been saving them, you know? So I haven't got too far. The Heroes is the next one I've got to read. And I keep planning on reading it. It's like everything else that I plan on reading. Every time I plan on reading it, there's like some event that happens in BookTube, and then I'm reading something else. And everything gets kicked into the future. And recently I try to realistically figure out, okay, what can I read when? And it's really depressing.
Yeah, people ask why you make a schedule. I'm like, so I don't just jump all over the place like I've been doing lately, you know, because I got tons of stuff that, you know, let's be honest here, I'm not a young man, and I'm not ever going to be able to read everything I want before I go. So I got to be picky and choosy. That's why I have to stop this rereading stuff that I keep doing. I keep rereading stuff. Like I'm rereading Dark Tower right now. Like, why are you doing this to yourself? So yeah, but I would reread First Law tomorrow because I love it.
Well, I think I've been reading fantasy wrong in that before I had a BookTube channel and I had to really care about what I was reading, you know, because I had to talk about it. Yeah. I could bounce around a little bit and I'd get to somehow I'd get to all the stuff I wanted to read. Now I can't. Now I'm doing reading all kinds of different things that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise. And so that thing I used to do where I would just read one and I jump around to another, I can't do that anymore. And I figured what I've got to do is just read just a group of them in a row just so I can get it read. Like Brian Lee Durfee's books, which I've been intending to get to forever. Well, I know that the third one's coming out. And so I've decided recently, and I'm going to do a video about it, is that I'm going to read all of those back to back, even though
we're doing a read along on the Discord starting in August. We always do like a horror thing in October, so we're doing August, September, and then skipping October, and then going to be reading the new one in November. But I'm excited about it because Brian's such a nice guy. He's awesome guy, and I would love to read another great book. And a lot of people that I know on the Discord that have read it really did say it's, You would
Yeah.
see, I think it's because the fact that he seems like such a goofball, people were like kind of blown away that he's like actually a really good epic fantasy writer. It's just it's kind of funny like that. But yeah, I can't wait
Yeah,
to.
and no, I have not heard anything bad about those books.
Hmm.
I've only heard positive stuff. So, yeah, I really look forward to those. And I got to get back to the Sun Eater books because I only read the first two, and that's another series I want to read more from because that's a great series.
Which
And
one, Sun
again,
Eater?
mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Rockio. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's
Yeah,
probably the best modern sci-fi. That and
mm-hmm.
Red Rising are like automatic for me when it comes to like modern sci-fi.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good series. And
how far into it are you?
I've only read the first two.
Okay.
And so, again, what I'll probably do is reread the first two because I want to do that. But it's such a well-realized world that he's put together.
And he's such a nice writer. Like just
He's
beautiful writing.
Yeah, the writing, the prose is really, really good. And it's an interesting story, and it's interesting the way he did it because what he did is he took the way you would write an historical novel, like about Augustus Caesar, for example, where you know where this guy ends up, right? You know how this all ends up. The interesting thing is how this character got there. And so it has that kind of historical novel format, but in the future, right? In a far future that we really don't know much about. It was clever. There's a lot of clever stuff about those books and entertaining. I like them. And I look forward to reading more of those.
No, I think Demon in White will completely blow you away, I think.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And he's such a hardworking guy. I mean, the fact we get to say we talk about fantasy sci-fi writers that just take forever, and this guy's pumping out Brandon Sanderson-sized books every single year. You know, he's got the new book coming out in December, and he's already like working on the next one. This next one isn't even out. He's working on the one after that already. So I always admire some people that really do hustle like that. Have you read the Expanse series?
Again, it's another one that I need to read more of. I read the first two.
Yeah, I've read two so far, but I love I stopped reading the books because the television series was so good, and I felt like I was spoiling it. So I said I was going to wait and read it after, and I
was ridiculous, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read all these books and then watch the show, which of course never happened.
Yeah.
So I've got to read the rest of those books. I'll just pile them on top of everything else I've got to read.
Yeah, that's how you really at this point. It's like, guys, I wish I could just clone myself, or I could just quit my job and read all day. I can't. I mean, it's still my primary form of entertainment, but there are so many hours in the day, and I do have two young kids. Okay, I got to neglect them a little less. They are starting to grow kind of fast. I'm already starting to feel like, oh man, they're going too fast.
Yeah, children, those are those little people that live in people's houses.
That's. I mean, I keep telling them to go run off in the woods and live with their people, but they won't listen to me. Hey, you do any gaming at all? I mean, video game, tabletop game, any of that stuff?
I haven't done anything like that since I was 13 or 14.
Oh, really? Okay, all right.
We used to do Dungeons and Dragons back when I was in high school. I did do that, but then everybody stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons, so I couldn't play anymore. But I did do that. But I've never been into video games, mostly because of my poor coordination and lack of time. I'm always reading books.
I always say that I have enough time in my life for 2 out of my 3 hobbies. If you got watching TV, playing video games, and reading, and I was like, reading is never going away. That's always going to be my number one. So if I'm watching something like with my wife, binge watching something, I'm not going to be playing any games. Or if I got a new Assassin's Creed game I want to play, well, I'm not going to be watching much TV right now. So it's just kind of like just kind of depends on the time. But yeah,
it's the terrible thing about life. You do something, you're not doing something else.
Yeah. So if guys, you want to start paying my bills, like all of them, then I'll get paid to read. That'd be great. You were in the Hellfire Club. I don't know if you've watched Stranger Things. It's a big thing on this current season of Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons thing. Thing about Dungeons and Dragons, I'd finally gotten a group together. My whole life, I'd put off playing Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, I'm a dork, but I'm not a nerd, But I finally was like, okay, you know what? I'm in my 40s now. Sure, I'll do it. I'll play some Dungeons and Dragons. We got this big group together. This guy had like a 65-inch LED TV where he was drawing the maps and all this stuff. We were playing on it was amazing. And then COVID happened.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. We tried once to do it over Zoom. It's like, this just isn't fun.
Now, COVID has to come and ruin everything.
Yeah, it's a shame. As far as other modern fantasy, I mean, you probably get this a ton. Have you read any Brandon Sanderson?
No, that is the one thing I do know. I understand that I'm not a real reader because I have not read Brandon Sanderson, and I intend to. I've got Brandon Sanderson sitting right over there, and haven't read his stuff yet. But I will. I
think
definitely
like
am going
Stormlight
to.
Archive. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Are you watching anything right now?
Star Trek, the new Star Trek show.
Wait, is it the Strange New World?
Right.
Well, here's the thing: is like I feel like Star Trek has been like downhill for me since Deep Space Nine. I feel like I've been hurt so many times, but people that I like, Trekkies that I know and love and trust, are telling me the Strange New World is actually really good, and they're actually surprised by how good it is. So,
well, it is a surprise if you consider what we have been through.
Yeah,
as Star Trek fans, it is a surprise. So it's perfectly understandable to go into that with low expectations. And there are things about it, as a diehard Star Trek fan, that disturbed me. First of all, the continuity doesn't work, and
they just need to quit trying. Just make it a standalone thing.
and I think that's kind of what they're doing. I think it's supposed to take place before the classic Star Trek, with these classic Star Trek characters. But you've got Spock, who does not act like Spock.
Yeah, right.
You know, he's not written
in the
like
J.J.
Spock.
Abrams verse. He didn't act like Spock either.
Exactly,
so.
exactly. But it is a good show. So despite everything I might not like about it, I like the show because it is good. It's a quality show, and it
has Captain Pike, right?
Right.
See, I like Anson Mount as Pike a lot. I thought he was pretty good.
He's really good, and he's really good in this show. And actually, all the cast is really good, and they've got great chemistry, and the show looks great, and it's a smartly written show. It's a really good show.
I'll wait and make sure it don't fall off before they've hurt me too. It's like Doctor Who at this point. It's going to take a lot to get me back.
Right. Just if you do go into it just if you imagine it as a Star Trek show that is in another universe, right? It's not connected to our Star Trek. Our Star Trek is done. Our Star Trek is over. This is a different thing. And even though it says it's a prequel, it's obviously not.
I said that when Discovery came out. It felt like Star Trek's the new Star Wars, and Star Wars is now something else. I don't even know what it is. So, yeah, that's kind of how it feels. It's like it's not the Star Trek that I grew up watching. But Deep Space Nine, I just felt like that was just like the peak of storytelling for Star Trek. I don't say you can get any better than that. And most of that talent went off to do other things. Like Ronald D. Moore went off to do Galactica, which I loved. And Outlander and things like that. So I feel like all the people that we grew up with next gen and Deep Space Nine, and even to a lesser extent Voyager. I was really hit or miss on Voyager. Enterprise had so much potential, Brent. It really did. I love Scott Bakula. I mean, who grew up in the 80s and doesn't love, Quantum Leap, I mean, who didn't love
that? Well, that show Enterprise, it got canceled right when it was starting.
Yeah, right when it started getting really good. Like I really liked I know a lot of Trek fans didn't like. I think it was like the third season when it went like full on serialized. It wasn't episodic, and I loved it because the story was really good. And that's when it got canceled. I was like, oh well, damn. So
well, it had lost all its goodwill by that point. Yeah. By that point, all of the Star Trek fans had abandoned it, and it's a shame that it started to get good when it did.
No, we're not talking about Picard. I watched one episode of Picard and I said, nope. Nope.
There were things about the first season of Picard that I liked. I haven't seen the newer season. I've had no interest, which is odd. I should, but I don't. It just doesn't look that.
I watched the first year and a half of Discovery because I love Michelle Yeoh. I thought she was going to be like the main cast member. I didn't know that she was just going to kind of be like a recurring character. That was why I started watching. That was for her. But I held on for a while. And I love Stargate, Ben. I think Stargate's amazing. I wish it would come back. I think Atlantis went off about 2 or 3 years earlier than it needed to, honestly.
I'm a little surprised it hasn't come back.
I think
I
they
feel like
tried
it's
with
going to.
Universe, and Stargate Universe just crashed so hard they just decided it was a dead IP. But I feel like I don't know. I
They'll
feel
give
like
it some time and then they'll bring it back.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's so funny about that is when that show first came out, I was like, I don't know what else they could do. I kind of feel like they covered everything in the movie. And then it goes like 10 years and a spinoff. And yeah, no, I love that. I love that show. But yeah, I love old classic sci-fi. I haven't really gotten into too many things, sci-fi wise, modern, because I don't know. This doesn't feel the same. I don't know. Maybe I just got older. And I still got the reruns of like Babylon 5 and stuff that I can go back to when I want some really great sci-fi. So
Yeah, there you go. It's always around.
yeah, it's always good stuff. Hey, Firefly was great, but it hurts, guys. It hurts. It's so funny finding new people discovering Firefly, and they're like, why doesn't Netflix have the second season? Whoops. Yeah. So anything else that you'd like to discuss before we go? Anything at all? I'm here. Anything you want to talk about at all?
Well, see, now you put me on.
Who's your favorite new kid on the block?
I am very new kid on the block.
Hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, I am. I think we talked. Well, the main thing I wanted to talk about, I think I've probably talked about. I want to, for anybody watching, I know you have the fantasy people watching, right? You are the fantasy channel probably. And I always urge people who are into modern fantasy to check out the origins of things.
Mm-hmm.
Check out the writers who influenced these writers. These writers read this stuff. Brandon Sanderson read this stuff, right? Michael Moorcock, Robert E. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs. Going further back, H. Rider Haggard. All of these writers, which by and large are forgotten by modern fantasy readers. Check this stuff out, because if you're really into this genre, you can get a lot out of that stuff. You can find out where a lot of these ideas came from. And it's always interesting going and checking out fantasy that's going to be different than the fantasy you're reading. The storytelling style is going to be different, but that's valuable. It's valuable to go back and check that stuff out. So if I have one thing to say, that's what I'm saying. Check out the classic stuff.
I always agree. I always say that it's important for us to read, the pillars of these genres. And when you talk about Tolkien and Howard, you're talking about the foundation of it. I mean, I know that they didn't create this stuff, but I feel like they're the ones who gave it its staying power for why we're still reading it today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, nothing more to add to that. So tell folks where they can find you. Do you social media at all or just YouTube? You
know what? I'm very old. And so the only thing I do is YouTube. Yeah. That's all I do. That's
you're not that old, because I think about like if I told my mom, hey, make a YouTube channel, she'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So
I'm practically there, but I discovered this accidentally. So.
Well, I really do appreciate the channel, because anytime I've got someone else out there that's talking about the classics and not being scared to do it, because I know a lot of people tell me they're scared to do it because, a lot of people who don't like you talking about some of these things these days, and that's fine. I kind of actually shied away from some stuff when I first started, and then I made that classics video. Just like I'm not going to pretend I don't like these things. If someone gets upset about it and they have to nope out on the channel because of it, I mean, that sucks. That sucks. But I guess that's. As the viewer, your time is yours and you've got to make that choice. But I will always talk about the classics, and I appreciate that there's someone who's really, really focused on that and talks about some of the great comic books that I love too. So on the
thank you.
side,
I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to watching you continue with Stephen King here, and maybe you can get me into. I'll tell you what, you review Lonesome Dove and tell me why it's great. I'll probably end up going ahead and doing it. So
I'll do it.
Yeah. So well, thanks so much for joining me. I know we're on different sides of the country here, so working this out wasn't the easiest on a weeknight, but I am so glad that we were able to do it. So guys, I'm going to drop a link to his channel below. Go sub. Let's get him to 10,000 subs before the end of the year. Easily. Easy. It's easy going, right?
We'll see.
It's good. All right. Thanks for joining me, man. I will talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.